Elena Santiago lay motionless on the operating table inside Methodist Hospital. Her body stiffened under the surgical straps. The overhead light burned through her eyelids, even when she tried to close them, a cold, blinding white that washed out everything else. She felt the metal beneath her back, the sterile chill of the room seeping into her bones, as if the whole place were designed to erase the warmth of human life. She tried to breathe slowly, but each breath felt trapped halfway up her throat, tight and shallow, as though the air itself refused to reach her lungs. The steady beep-beep of the heart monitor echoed sharply in her ears. Each sound struck the inside of her skull like a hammer, a reminder of how quickly her body was surrendering to fear. The surgical instruments clattered softly as a nurse arranged them on a tray, the metallic tremor slicing through the tense silence. Through the frosted observation window, she could make out the silhouettes of Bianca Rivera and her parents. A moment later, the shapes sharpened, and she saw Bianca clearly, arms crossed, posture rigid, expression razor-sharp. Her eyes didn't blink. They didn't shift. They simply drilled into Elena with a single silent command. Sign it. Do it. Don't hesitate. Elena had already signed. The consent form was somewhere on the doctor's desk, her trembling signature marking a decision that felt less like an act of love and more like a death sentence she had written for herself. Her throat tightened as this thought resurfaced, but she forced herself to look up at the ceiling instead of at Bianca. A nurse approached with the syringe, clear liquid glinting under the surgical light. "We're starting anesthesia," the nurse said softly, but the words seemed to float in the air, distant and muffled. Elena's chest grew heavier. She tried to inhale, to tell herself this was right. "I have to save him," she repeated silently. "I have to save Marcos." The thought throbbed in her mind with every beat of the monitor, beating alongside guilt, fear, and an unnamed dread coiling in the pit of her stomach. Her fingers twitched involuntarily against the leather strap. Another breath, another spike of panic. The nurse lifted the syringe a little higher, preparing to insert the needle into the foreline, and then a violent crash shattered the suffocating quiet. The operating room door slammed open so hard that the tray of instruments rattled, a few clamps and forceps clinking together on the edge. Everyone turned at once. A small figure burst through the doorway, shoes muddy, uniform wrinkled, chest heaving with frantic breaths. Dany, 9 years old, pale, terrified, determined. "Dany, you can't be in here," a nurse cried behind him, but the boy didn't stop. He ran straight to the operating table, tears streaking his face, voice trembling but loud enough to freeze the entire room. "Grandma, I have to tell the truth." The words hung in the sterile air, sharp enough to cut through the lights, the fear, and the momentum of the surgery itself. Everything and everyone went dead still. The silence in the operating room pressed against Elena's chest, and as Dany's trembling voice echoed in her ears, her mind pulled her backward into the long, exhausting months that had brought her to this table. Life on the west side of San Antonio had never been easy, but lately it felt as if every breath she took carried the weight of an entire household. The narrow streets around Culebra Road, the faded stucco walls, the heat pressing in even during December. Everything around her seemed tired, worn, stretched thin, just like she was. Every morning before dawn, Elena walked to Market Square, where she worked long shifts at a souvenir stall. Her hands wrapped tamales in foil for tourists, bag trinkets, folded colorful cotton shirts, while the smell of roasted peppers drifted through the open-air market. She smiled when customers spoke to her, even when her feet throbbed and her back tightened. She needed the money. Every dollar mattered. Each shift meant another day her family might stay afloat. After work, she would return home to care for Roberto, her husband, once stubborn and strong, now frozen by a stroke that had stolen his words and much of his movement. His eyes followed her everywhere she went, grateful, guilty, helpless. She fed him with a spoon, adjusted his pillows, massaged his hands when they cramped. Sometimes, in the quiet moments after she helped him into bed, she would rest her forehead lightly against his shoulder and let herself breathe for a moment. There was never time for more than that. Marcos, her eldest, had always been the robust one, the boy who lifted heavy boxes without effort, who danced with Bianca at family cookouts, who laughed easily. But then the diagnosis arrived, kidney failure, and everything shifted. He grew thinner, paler. The dialysis drained him. His voice turned small. The house, already heavy with Roberto's silence, now felt weighted by Marcos's suffering too. Diego, the youngest, watched all of it quietly. He spoke little, but his eyes missed nothing. He noticed the bills Elena tucked under a ceramic bowl on the counter. He saw the strain in her shoulders when she carried Roberto from the wheelchair to the bed. He watched Bianca whisper to Marcos in low, urgent tones, her expressions sharp and hard to read. Diego said nothing, but the tension in his jaw grew a little tighter every day. And then there was Dany, her grandson, her small island of warmth in a house where illness and responsibility crowded every room. Dany would crawl into her lap after school, resting his head against her chest, his small hands clinging to her like he knew she needed him just as much as he needed her. His laughter filled the spaces where grief tried to settle. When he whispered, "Grandma, you're the strongest person I know," Elena believed she could keep going a little longer. Yet beneath all of this, Market Square shifts, Roberto's care, Marcos's decline, Diego's silence, Dany's fragile hope, there was a pressure Elena could never quite name, a pressure that tightened slowly, like a knot forming in the center of her life. And now, lying on the operating table, Dany's words still trembling in the air, she realized that knot was about to unravel. In the months leading up to the surgery, the Santiago household began to shift in ways Elena felt but could not fully name. It started softly, almost imperceptibly, like a draft sneaking through a door that wasn't completely shut. And at the center of every shift, every quiet change, was Bianca Rivera. Bianca moved through the house with the confidence of someone rearranging furniture in a place she already considered hers. She adjusted the blinds without asking. She reorganized the kitchen cabinets. She corrected Elena's grocery choices as if she were managing an employee instead of speaking to her husband's mother. It wasn't what she said. Bianca rarely raised her voice. It was the way she spoke. Low tones, crisp instructions, comments that landed like commands disguised as suggestions. During dinner, the atmosphere thickened. Elena rarely had the energy to cook after her shifts at Market Square, so Bianca took over the kitchen, but not with warmth. She cooked quickly, efficiently, and served with a precision that felt clinical rather than caring. When she set plates on the table, her movements were sharp, her expression unreadable. One evening, as everyone sat down, Bianca placed a spoonful of rice and a piece of chicken onto Elena's plate. The action might have looked helpful from afar, but Elena felt the cold edge beneath it, the unspoken message. "You'll eat what I decide you should eat." Bianca's voice followed, smooth and icy. "You need strength, Elena. Don't overthink it." Elena swallowed hard, picking up her fork even as her throat tightened. There was no kindness in Bianca's tone, only a quiet dominance that grew stronger with each passing day. Marcos, slumped in his chair, looked smaller than he ever had in his life. Dialysis had hollowed out his cheeks. His hands trembled when he lifted his glass. He glanced at Elena with desperate eyes, the kind that begged long before the words came. "Mama, please," he whispered one night, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "You're the only one who can save me." His voice cracked, and Elena felt something inside her fracture with it. She reached across the table, taking his shaking hand, her own fingers cold with fear. The thought of losing him, the boy she had raised alone through half her life, was more than she could bear. Across from them, Bianca watched. Her face remained perfectly composed, but her eyes glinted with an intensity that Diego noticed immediately. Diego, always quiet, always observant, kept his gaze on Bianca, not openly, not with confrontation, but with a silent, growing suspicion. He studied the way her eyes lingered on Marcos's plate, the way she corrected Elena with a thin smile, the way she tightened her grip on the household without ever raising her voice. The house felt dimmer now, as though the lights themselves were struggling to brighten the rooms. Conversations faded. Laughter vanished. Even Roberto, trapped in his chair, seemed to sense the heaviness settling around them. Every evening felt like a vigil. Every dinner like a quiet morning. The Santiago home, once full of warmth and family noise, now held a stillness that resembled a wake. Everyone breathing, eating, existing, but no one truly alive. And Bianca stood at the center of it all, calm, composed, quietly in control. It happened on a quiet afternoon. One of those heavy Texas days when the sun pressed hard against the windows, and even the air inside the house felt too warm. Elena was folding laundry in the living room. Roberto's shirts, Marcos's loose sweatpants, when she sensed Dany lingering at the doorway. He wasn't humming like usual. He wasn't shuffling his feet or playing with the loose thread on his sleeve. He just stood there, unusually still. "Grandma," he asked softly. Elena looked up, smiling out of habit. "Yes, me, Joe." He stepped closer, his hands twisting nervously in front of him. His eyes, normally bright, curious, were clouded with something heavier, something that didn't belong to a 9-year-old. What happens if someone gives the wrong medicine on purpose? The words struck her like a gust of cold air. Her fingers froze around a towel, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. The room, already warm, suddenly felt suffocating. "What do you mean, Dany?" she asked carefully, forcing her voice to stay gentle. Dany shrugged, but the motion was stiff, rehearsed, like he'd been thinking about this long before he spoke. Just what would happen? Would someone get really sick? Or could they? His voice trailed off. Elena's heart pounded hard against her ribs. She wanted to reach out, to pull him into her arms, to ask where this was coming from, but fear clenched her throat. She forced a small smile. "Sweetheart, you shouldn't worry about things like that. Medicines are supposed to help people." Dany looked down at his shoes. "But what if someone wanted the opposite?" he whispered. Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine, slow, deliberate, settling deep in her stomach. She placed the folded towel aside and stood, brushing a hand gently through his hair. "Everything is fine," she said softly. "Don't think about strange things, okay?" But Dany didn't look convinced. He stayed quiet, eyes darting toward the hallway, toward the part of the house where Bianca often moved like a shadow, her footsteps precise, her voice always calm, always measured. When Elena later walked into the kitchen, she noticed Bianca wiping down the counter, movements sharp and controlled. Bianca turned just slightly, offering a tight, polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Something in that smile made Elena's stomach twist. Dany's question echoed again in her mind. Colder this time. Wrong medicine. On purpose. And for the first time, Elena felt the faint stirrings of dread, small, almost invisible, but deep enough to root itself inside her. The house was silent that night, the kind of silence that felt too deep, too absolute. Elena lay awake for hours, staring at the faint glow of the street lamp slipping through the blinds. Her body was exhausted, but her mind refused to rest. Dany's strange question kept returning, circling her thoughts like a moth drawn to flame. Near midnight, her throat felt dry, so she rose quietly from her bed. Roberto slept in his chair beside her, his breathing shallow but steady. Elena adjusted the blanket over his legs before stepping into the hallway. The old wooden floor creaked under her weight, even though she tried to move lightly. She made her way toward the kitchen, the air cooler there, the darkness broken only by the dim hum of the refrigerator. She had just taken a sip of water when she heard voices, low, muffled, coming from down the hall. Marcos and Bianca's room. The door was mostly shut, but not completely. A thin sliver of warm light spilled into the hallway. Elena froze. Bianca's voice came first, sharp even when whispered. After the transplant, we'll have all the data we need. A pause, the sound of fabric rustling. Then Marcos's weak reply, his voice trembling with fatigue. Are you sure this is the only way? Bianca hissed softly as if silencing him. She won't dare refuse. Not after the surgery. Once it's done, she'll have no choice. Elena felt her pulse slam against her ribcage. Data. The word hit her stomach like a blow. It was too cold, too calculated, too out of place in a conversation about a life-or-death surgery. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself, her hands shaking. Bianca continued, her tone clipped, almost impatient. Everything has to go according to plan. The timing, the paperwork, all of it. If she backs out now, everything collapses. Marcos murmured something Elena couldn't hear, his voice fading into Bianca's sharper one. You're thinking too much, Bianca said. Focus on the transplant. After that, everything falls into place. Another pause. Then the bed shifted with a soft thump, as if someone had sat down heavily. Elena's breath caught. She felt like an intruder in her own home. She knew she should walk away, go back to her room, pretend she heard nothing. But her feet wouldn't move. Her mind scrambled to connect the fragments, the pressure to sign the consent form, Dany's question about wrong medicine, Diego's silent suspicion, Bianca's cold control. But she couldn't make the pieces align. Not yet. She backed away slowly, heart pounding, the shadows of the hallway stretching long around her. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, but the truth still hovered, just out of reach. She returned to her room, clutching her chest as she sat on the edge of the bed. Data. The word echoed again, and for the first time she wondered whether saving Marcos was the only thing this surgery was really about. Diego had always been quiet, but in the weeks leading up to the transplant, his silence sharpened into something else, watchfulness. He moved through the house like someone listening for a sound no one else could hear. Every shift in tone, every glance exchanged across the dinner table, every small detail that didn't fit, he noticed all of it. One afternoon, while dropping off a bag of groceries Elena had asked for, Diego stepped into Marcos and Bianca's room to leave the items on the dresser. Marcos was at dialysis, and the room felt unusually still. Diego turned to leave, but something on the nightstand caught his attention. A small brown bottle, no label, no pharmacy sticker, no dosage instructions, just a plain bottle, out of place in a house where every medication was carefully organized for Marcos's treatment. Diego picked it up. The cap was slightly loose, as if someone had opened it recently. He shook it gently. Something inside shifted with a soft tap. Pills. But the bottle felt wrong, too generic, too secretive. His jaw tightened. He put it back exactly where he found it and stepped into the hallway, but the unease stayed with him. As he walked toward the kitchen, he heard footsteps behind him. Bianca. She entered the kitchen without acknowledging him, her hair pulled tight, her expression carved from cold stone. She filled a glass of water, reached into her pocket, and with a movement so fast Diego almost missed it, dropped a small white pill into the glass. The pill dissolved instantly. Diego's heart slammed against his ribs. He stood just far enough around the corner to avoid being seen, yet close enough to watch. Bianca stirred the water with a spoon, her face unreadable. Then she walked down the hall, pausing briefly at the doorway before slipping inside with the glass. Diego lifted his phone, hands shaking. He zoomed in, snapped a picture, Bianca holding the glass, her posture rigid, her expression closed off, the faint swirl in the water still visible. His throat tightened. What was she giving him? Why secretly? Why no label? When Bianca came out a few minutes later, Diego stepped back into the shadow of the hallway. She passed by without noticing him, her heels clicking sharply against the old wooden floor. He waited until she disappeared into the backyard before slipping into the room. Marcos lay half asleep, unaware, the empty glass on the nightstand. Diego leaned in as if adjusting the curtains, snapped another photo, the glass, the residue at the bottom. The unmarked bottle, now missing from its place. A slow burn of anger rose in his chest. Hot, controlled, dangerous. He didn't confront her. Not yet. But something inside him shifted permanently. That evening, Diego followed Bianca from a distance as she left the house, keeping to shadows, staying just far enough behind. She walked with certainty, like someone heading toward a plan already in motion. And Diego, fists tight in his pockets, followed with quiet fury. Whatever she was doing to Marcos, whatever she was hiding, he was going to find out. Diego followed Bianca at a careful distance, his truck merging into the late afternoon traffic along Loop 410. She drove with the same precision she carried into every conversation. Straight lines, steady speed, no hesitation. That alone unsettled him. Bianca never acted without purpose. She eventually exited toward Ingram Park Mall. Diego kept 2 cars behind her, gripping the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles pale. The sky was beginning to dim, the Texas heat settling into a heavy dusk haze. He felt his pulse quicken. Bianca pulled into the far end of the mall parking lot, an area rarely used. Quiet except for a few stray shopping carts and a flickering light post. She parked beside a faded silver sedan already waiting there. Arturo Molina. Diego recognized him instantly, one of Marcos's old acquaintances, a man always drifting around the edges of trouble. Someone who never showed up unless he wanted something, or someone had something to give him. Diego killed his engine and slid down in his seat, watching from behind a sun-worn pair of tinted glasses. His phone was ready in his hand. Bianca stepped out of her car, her posture straight, her movements brisk. She carried a small dark tote bag, the same one she kept in her closet, the one Diego had always assumed held makeup or receipts. But today, she guarded it too closely. Arturo got out of his sedan and approached her. Their exchange was quiet but tense, their gestures sharp and quick. Diego zoomed in with his phone camera, heart pounding. Bianca opened the tote bag and handed Arturo a small package wrapped in plain paper. He peeked inside just enough for Diego to catch a glimpse. Pill bottles. More than one. All unlabeled. Diego's stomach twisted. Arturo nodded, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope. He pressed it into Bianca's hand. She glanced inside, then closed it with a satisfied snap. Her face, usually composed, shifted into something darker. Calculating. Confident. Nothing like the polite daughter-in-law she pretended to be at the dinner table. Click. Diego captured the moment. The exchange. The envelope. The bag. His hand trembled, but the camera stayed steady. Bianca said something to Arturo, too far for Diego to hear, but the tilt of her chin told him everything. This wasn't a one-time meeting. This was coordination. Intentional. Dangerous. Arturo nodded again, slipped into his car and drove off. Bianca stood alone for a moment, adjusting her hair, checking the envelope one last time before placing it into her tote bag. Diego took another photo, her face in profile, eyes sharp with calculation. This was no misunderstanding, no paranoia, no coincidence. This was evidence, the first piece of something far darker than Diego had imagined. And he knew, deep in his chest, that whatever Bianca was planning, it wasn't just about Marcos anymore. Dany hadn't meant to find anything. He wasn't snooping. He wasn't trying to create trouble. He had only been looking for his iPad charger, the one Bianca always borrowed and never returned. That afternoon, while Bianca was in the backyard on a phone call and Marcos slept in the living room, Dany slipped into the bedroom she shared with his uncle. He moved quietly, the way children do when they've learned to navigate tense households. Bianca's tote bag lay open on the bed, its contents half spilled. Dany's eyes scanned the clutter: lip balm, receipts, a small notebook, and Bianca's phone. He hesitated. Bianca would be furious if she caught him touching it, but something, maybe instinct, maybe that lingering dread, pulled him closer. The phone lit up when he tapped it. No password. Bianca often bragged that only careless people used passwords. A list of recordings popped up on the screen. Dany's breath hitched. One file had been saved just hours earlier. He clicked it. Bianca's voice filled the room, cold, controlled, terrifying in its certainty. After the transplant, the numbers will align. She won't refuse. Not after what we'll have over her. Dany's knees buckled. He tightened his grip on the phone, his pulse thundering in his ears. Bianca's voice continued, sharper now. That old woman has no idea what she's stepping into. But she will. Once the procedure's done, she'll do exactly what she's told. The recording ended. Dany's hands shook so violently he nearly dropped the phone. Fear surged through him, not the childhood kind brought on by scary movies or bad dreams, but a deeper, bone-level terror. Something terrible was happening, and his grandmother was at the center of it. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, Bianca returning. Dany panicked. He shoved the phone back into the tote bag, zipped it halfway, and slipped out the other door, heart hammering. He ran straight to Elena, who was in the kitchen peeling boiled eggs for Roberto's dinner. She turned when she heard him, startled by the wild look on his face. Dany? What's wrong, sweetheart? He couldn't speak at first. His small chest rose and fell in frantic bursts. Then he thrust the phone toward her with trembling hands. Grandma, I have to show you something. Elena wiped her hands on a towel, confused but attentive. Dany pressed play with a shaky finger. Bianca's voice poured out, the same venomous words, the same chilling certainty. Elena's heart collapsed inside her chest. Her spine stiffened. Her breath escaped her in a sharp, broken gasp. No, this can't, she wouldn't, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dany grabbed her sleeve. But she said it. She said it, Grandma. Elena forced herself to stay steady, though her hands began to tremble as violently as his. Her throat constricted. Tears burned behind her eyes. But even as horror washed over her, she shook her head weakly. She must be talking about something else, she whispered. We must be misunderstanding. Grandma, please, Dany begged, his voice cracking. She said, after the transplant. She said you won't refuse. Elena pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, trying to muffle a sob. She wanted to believe Dany. She wanted to trust what was right in front of her. But admitting the truth meant admitting something unthinkable. It meant facing the possibility that saving Marcos wasn't Bianca's goal at all. And Elena, crushed under fear and love, wasn't ready to let that truth in. Not yet. The conference room at Methodist Hospital felt colder than the rest of the building, its fluorescent lights casting a pale sheen over the long table. Elena sat near the end, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. She hadn't slept. Dany's recording had replayed in her mind all night like a whisper she couldn't silence. But now, surrounded by doctors and family, she forced herself to sit upright, to breathe normally, to appear composed. Dr. Alejandro Cruz stood at the head of the table, charts spread out before him. His expression was clinical but softened by concern. Thank you all for coming, he began. We've completed the compatibility tests for potential kidney donors. Elena felt her stomach lurch. She already knew the answer, but hearing it aloud made her throat tighten. "The results confirm," Dr. Cruz continued, "that Mrs. Elena Santiago is the best donor candidate. In fact, the only viable one." A heavy silence fell over the room. Elena swallowed hard. The word struck like a final verdict, sealing every exit she thought she might still have. She felt the walls closing in, the weight of expectation, of obligation, of fear pressing down until she could barely breathe. Across the table, Bianca sat with her arms elegantly folded, her parents flanking her like a silent jury. Their posture said everything. "This is happening. You will do your part." Bianca didn't smile, but her eyes gleamed with a quiet certainty, as though the meeting were simply a formality for a decision already made. Marcos sat in a wheelchair beside her, thin and ghost-like. His skin had taken on a yellowish tint, dark circles carved deep under his eyes. He looked at Elena with a mixture of pleading and shame. "Mama," his voice cracked. "Please, I don't want to die." Elena's heart twisted violently. She had carried this boy, raised him alone through the hardest parts of her life, watched him become a man. Now, he looked like a frightened child begging her to turn back time. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she blinked them away. Diego sat quietly in the corner of the room, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He watched Bianca carefully, watched the subtle smirk that flickered across her face when Dr. Cruz spoke, watched the faint twitch of satisfaction when Marcos pleaded. Diego's fists tightened. He could already feel that something about this moment was deeply, painfully wrong. Dr. Cruz cleared his throat. "Mrs. Santiago, I know this is a heavy decision. The risks are real. But Marcos's condition is deteriorating rapidly. Without a transplant soon, I'll do it," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Everyone turned to her. Her chest felt hollow, her body numb. She wasn't speaking from certainty, only from a sense of inevitability. Bianca's gaze locked onto her, triumphant. Marcos exhaled shakily, tears slipping down his cheeks. Bianca's parents nodded as though concluding a business transaction. Elena forced herself to breathe. She had agreed. She had walked into the trap. And though no one in the room said it aloud, the atmosphere pulsed with a truth she felt deep in her bones. This decision wasn't hers anymore. It had been made for her long before she ever stepped into that room. The night before the surgery, the house felt heavier than it ever had. The air was still, unmoving, as if even the wind refused to cross the threshold. Elena stepped out into the backyard, letting the screen door creak softly behind her. The moon hung low over San Antonio, round, pale, distant, casting a faint silver glow across the patchy grass and the faded wooden fence. She wrapped her arms around herself, not because it was cold, but because she felt suddenly small in a world that had grown unbearably large. The moonlight washed over her face, and in it she saw the truth she had tried so hard not to see. She was alone. Not entirely in the physical sense. Dany's love, Diego's quiet presence, Roberto's steady eyes were still with her, but in spirit she had never felt lonelier. Her own family had pressed her toward the operating table. Her son's in-laws spoke to her as though she were a vessel, a resource. Even Marcos, in his desperation, had clung to her not as a mother, but as a last lifeline. The betrayal cut deeper for that very reason. Not because they wished harm, but because they had ceased to see her as a person at all. She heard the soft hum of Roberto's wheelchair behind her. She turned just enough to see him in the doorway, his eyes reflecting the same moonlight she had been staring at. His face, once expressive and stubborn, was now trapped in stillness. But the tear that escaped the corner of his, "I told her everything," he couldn't say. Elena walked to him and knelt, wiping the tear gently with her thumb. "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." They stayed like that for a while, two people bound by silence, both grieving a family that had slipped away from what it once was. Later, inside the dim kitchen, Elena pulled out a small notepad from the top drawer. Her hands trembled as she wrote, but her resolve did not. She penned a short letter to Diego, thanking him for seeing what others chose not to see, and another to Dany, telling him he was the light of her life. Then she added instructions the way the original story demanded. Who would receive what, how the house should be handled, who should care for Roberto if she didn't survive. She folded the papers carefully and placed them beneath the ceramic bowl on the counter, the same place Diego always checked. Outside, the moon remained unblinking. Inside, Elena braced herself for morning. The operating room felt colder the second time Elena was wheeled in, as if the walls themselves remembered her fear from the earlier consultation and were now amplifying it. The surgical lights blazed above her, sharp and white, slicing through the sterile air like blades. Everything smelled of antiseptic and metal. She lay strapped to the table, wrists secured, and 4 taped to her arm, the monitor beside her ticking out the frantic rhythm of her heart. Beep, 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 beep. Her chest tightened. She tried to swallow, but her throat was too dry. Every breath felt uneven, as though her lungs had forgotten how to follow a steady pace. Nurses moved around her with efficient motions, hands gloved, voices low, footsteps quick and muffled against the linoleum floor. She turned her head toward the glass partition. On the other side, behind the observation window, Bianca Rivera watched. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest. Her face, usually composed, was pale, her jaw clenched. For the first time, something cracked through her mask, a flicker of unease. Something she hadn't expected, something she didn't control. Elena felt the weight of Bianca's gaze like a hand pressing hard against her ribs. A nurse positioned the anesthesia syringe, tapping it lightly to release the air. "Mrs. Santiago," he said gently, "we're about to begin. You may feel a warming sensation." But Elena barely heard him. Her heart was pounding too loudly, thudding in her ears like footsteps coming closer. Her hands trembled against the straps. Panic rose inside her chest, not the normal fear of surgery, but something darker, something seeded by Dany's recording, Diego's silence, Bianca's whispers in the night. She tried to lift her head. "Wait," she managed, her voice cracking. The nurse leaned closer. "It's okay. Just breathe." The needle touched the foreport, and then a crash, a scream, a door slamming against the wall so violently that even the surgeons flinched. The operating room froze. A small figure barreled through the doorway, a blur of panic, desperation, and raw courage. Dany. His sneakers skidded on the floor. His face was red from running, eyes wide with terror, hair flattened by sweat. He looked like a child fighting a storm, but also like the storm itself. "Stop!" he screamed, voice breaking. "Stop! Stop the surgery!" A nurse rushed toward him. "You can't be in here." But Dany pushed past her with surprising force, moving straight to the table where Elena lay. His little hands shook violently as he clutched the edge of the table, gasping for breath. "Grandma, I have to tell the truth," he cried, the same line that had shattered the room earlier, but now filled with even more urgency, more fear. Elena's breath caught. "Dany!" behind the glass. Bianca staggered back a step, color draining from her face. Her hand slapped against the window for balance. For the first time since all of this began, she looked genuinely frightened, her composure cracking under the weight of something she could not stop. Doctors exchanged alarmed glances. The anesthesiologist withdrew his hands. The room hovered on the brink of chaos. Dany's voice trembled as he pointed at Elena, then toward the hallway where Diego was surely running behind him. "She can't do it. You can't let her. It's not safe. Please, you have to listen." His cry cut through the sterile air, slicing straight to the core of the operating team. And in that instant, everything, everyone, every motion came to a standstill. Dany's shout still echoed through the operating room when Diego burst through the doorway a second later, out of breath, fury shaking through every line of his body. He held his phone in one hand, screen lit, thumb hovering over the video file he had been guarding like a live wire. "Don't touch her," he barked, pointing at the anesthesiologist. "Stop everything." The medical team drew back, startled. Dr. Cruz stepped forward, maintaining calm, but clearly alarmed. "What is going on here?" he demanded. Dany clung to Elena's arm. "Show them," he begged Diego. "Please show them." Diego looked straight at Dr. Cruz. "You need to see this before you put a needle anywhere near my mother." Bianca, behind the glass, shook her head violently. Her face was draining of color. "No," she mouthed, slamming her palm against the window. "No." But Diego had already tapped the screen. The video lit up with the grainy image of Ingram Park Mall's empty parking lot. Bianca stepped out of her car, tote bag in hand. She approached Arturo Molina, lean, nervous, shifting from foot to foot. The audio was faint but clear enough. Bianca's voice, cold, clipped, unmistakable, filled the operating room. "After the transplant, the numbers will align. She won't refuse. Not once we have the data." The staff froze. The video continued, Bianca handing over a package of unlabeled pill bottles, Arturo giving her a thick envelope in return. Bianca stopping to peek inside with a smirk. Then her voice again, sharper. "That old woman won't know what hit her." Gasps rippled through the room. One nurse stepped back, hand covering her mouth. Another dropped a tray of clamps, the metallic clatter echoing like gunshots. Dr. Cruz's face tightened in horror as he leaned in closer to the screen. Behind the glass, Bianca pounded her fist against the window. "That's not what it looks like. That video is fake. He doctored it." Diego snapped his head toward her. "I watched you drug Marcos. I saw the pills. And now this? Fake? Say it again." Bianca's composure shattered. She turned frantic, desperate, beating the glass with both palms. "You don't understand. I was trying to help. They took the video out of context." But the words sounded hollow, paper-thin against the mountain of evidence, now suffocating the room. Dany clutched Elena's hand as she trembled on the operating table. Tears streamed down her temples, trailing into her hair. She whispered Dany's name over and over, voice cracking with shock and relief and devastation all at once. Dr. Cruz straightened. He looked around the room, the anesthesiologist frozen beside the four, the circulating nurse pale as a sheet, the surgical techs standing motionless with fear in their eyes. Then he spoke, his voice firm, ringing with authority. "This is no longer a surgery." He turned toward the door. "This is a crime scene." His words hit the room like a detonator. A nurse bolted into the hallway, calling security. Within seconds, hospital police arrived, followed by 2 San Antonio Police Department officers in uniform. Bianca tried to run when they opened the observation room door, but one officer grabbed her arm and slammed the cuffs on with swift, practiced motion. "You can't do this," she screamed, thrashing. "I didn't do anything. I'm his wife. I was trying to save him." Arturo was brought in minutes later, pulled from the parking garage. Dazed, sweaty, mumbling excuses. He refused to make eye contact with Bianca as officers cuffed him, too. The hallway outside the operating room filled with stunned staff and murmured shock. Inside, Elena finally allowed herself to breathe. Diego lowered his phone, chest heaving. Dany pressed his forehead to Elena's arm, sobbing quietly. Dr. Cruz stepped beside Elena. His voice gentled. "We're stopping everything. You're safe." Marcos, pale and confused on his gurney, stared at the chaos unraveling around him. "Mama, what's happening?" Elena looked at him, not with anger, not with judgment, but with an indescribable mixture of love and heartbreak. "You'll be okay," she whispered. Dr. Cruz nodded to the nurses. Get him back to dialysis. Full evaluation. No more interference. As Marcos was wheeled away, Elena watched him disappear down the hall, her heart aching from both love and betrayal. But the truth was finally out. Bianca's plan had collapsed. The surgery was stopped, and Elena Santiago, strapped to a table minutes from losing her kidney, had been pulled back from the edge of a carefully crafted trap. The crime scene was closed. The healing had just begun. The weeks after the hospital incident unfolded slowly, like a long exhale after months of suffocating tension. Marcos remained under close observation at Methodist Hospital, receiving proper dialysis and medication, real medication, monitored by real professionals, not the secret pills Bianca had been slipping into his drinks. His color gradually returned. His eyes grew clearer. The tremor in his hands eased. One afternoon, when Elena visited him, he broke down completely. He covered his face with both hands, shoulders shaking with sobs he had tried to hold back. "Mama, I didn't know," he whispered through tears. "I swear to you, I didn't know what she was doing. I was so scared of dying. I didn't see anything else." Elena sat quietly beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. She didn't tell him she forgave him, because forgiveness wasn't something to rush. But she didn't pull away either. She let him cry. She let him release months of fear and guilt. That in itself was enough for now. The Rivera family spiraled into chaos. Investigators unearthed enough evidence to open a full criminal case: medical fraud, possession of unregulated pharmaceuticals, and conspiracy to commit bodily harm. Bianca's parents lawyered up immediately, but the digital trail, the recorded calls, and Arturo Molina's cooperation with police created a wall they couldn't climb. News spread quietly through the community, not loudly, not shamefully, but with the grim softness of people who realized something terrible had been happening right next door. Through it all, Diego remained steadfast. He drove Elena to every hospital visit. He handled the paperwork. He spoke with the detectives. He kept Dany close, comforting him each time the boy feared he had caused too much trouble by telling the truth. Dany, for his part, refused to leave Elena's side. He clung to her arm at doctor's appointments, fell asleep on her lap on the couch, and often whispered, "Grandma, are you really okay?" as if he was afraid she might vanish if he stopped asking. Elena would cup his cheek and say the same soft answer every time, "I'm here. Thanks to you." One warm Texas evening, long after the police cars stopped coming and the hospital visits became routine instead of frightening, Elena stepped out onto the front porch. The sun was sinking behind the rooftops of the west side, turning the sky orange and soft gold. A faint breeze rustled the pecan tree in the yard. She sat slowly in her old wooden chair, the one Roberto used to fix whenever it wobbled. The boards creaked beneath her weight, familiar and comforting. Diego and Dany were inside, talking softly, their voices drifting through the open window. Elena folded her hands in her lap, letting the quiet settle around her. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel victorious. But she felt free. For the first time in what felt like years, she breathed without pressure on her chest. The air was warm, the evening gentle. No trickery, no whispers, no trap waiting for her beyond the next sunrise. Just peace. She closed her eyes, the Texas dusk wrapping itself softly around her. Sometimes the truth doesn't save you, she thought. It frees you, and in that small, quiet moment, freedom was enough.